I have to say something only to be funny.
Yeah.
As the Sacha Baron Cohen fan that I am.
So
You freed Nelson Mandela!
Free Nelson Mandela! Free Nelson Mandela!
The only thing I could think of when I started researching about you was how I had to say that in front of you because I'm such an Ali G fan.
So am I.
Yeah, are you really?
By the way,
he's
you
hysterical.
You do a terrific.
Oh, do I?
Yes.
Yeah, no, respect. Hi, welcome to Wine with Adam. I'm your host, Adam Scott Bellos, and I am joined by today's guest, who is the incredible Freedom's Counsel, Irwin Cotler, former Minister of Justice in Canada, human rights and activist lawyer, head of the Raoul Wallenberg Center of Human Rights, professor of law emeritus at McGill University. You're a father, and you're a grandfather, and you're a husband. What am I missing?
No, you just the last points were the most important point.
Grandfather and father, huh?
That's it.
I can't disagree with you. You've fought against the majority of the human rights violators in terms of global world leaders. You fought against Xi Jinping's China, the Soviet Union, Khomeini's Iran, Maduro's Venezuela, MBS's Saudi Arabia, Putin's Russia, Erdogan's Turkey, the Congo, and Rwanda. What am I missing?
No, you've covered
I covered
a lot of.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining me, by the way.
A pleasure, Adam, and there's no better place to meet than here in Jerusalem.
I just thank you for taking the time because you're a legend, and in my opinion, more and more young people need to know your work. And that's why we're sitting down today.
So I'm inspired by young people, so that's what keeps me going.
Today, for Wine with Adam, we're drinking the 2018 Tulip Black. It was actually awarded 95 points by Decanter this year. It's a very good blend of Petit Verdot, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and Cab Sauv. And I'd love to know just what you think of it.
I can just say, l'chaim for this wonderful taste.
L'chaim for this wonderful taste. That's good for me. Absolutely fantastic. So, your story really begins with your parents. They instilled this value of tzedek with you. If I'm correct, you said your parents taught you to see, feel, and understand injustice in order to fight it.
They each taught it in a different way. It was my father who taught me when I was too young to understand the profundity of what he was saying, but he repeated it over time until I began to appreciate it. When he would say to me that the pursuit of justice, and he would say it to me in Hebrew, tzedek, equal to all the other commandments combined. But then he said, this is what you must teach onto your children. In other words, it was an intergenerational obligation. And he said, this must be your life's credo. But it was my mother, when she would hear my father saying these things to me, would say to me, if you want to pursue justice, you have to understand, you have to feel the injustice about you. You have to go in and about your community and beyond and feel the injustice and combat the injustice.
You're the chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, and through the center, you're representing many different human rights activists that are in prison right now. How did Raoul Wallenberg's life influence you in your work today and really kind of put you on the trajectory of your professional career from really the start of the 70s?
Well, one of the most important people in my life whom I met early was Elie Wiesel. Through him, I saw the Holocaust and its universal messages as a looking glass into our responsibilities today. With regard to Raoul Wallenberg, I began to read about him, etc., and I learned how one person with the compassion to care and the courage to act could confront evil, prevail, and transform history.
But that's a big deal, what you just said. One person can transform history.
Right, and I'll give you the example of it. Between mid-May and the beginning of July 1944, 440,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to the death camp in Auschwitz, the fastest, most cruelest, most efficient killing field in all of the Holocaust. Nobody could say at that point, we did not know what was happening. Raoul Wallenberg arrives in the Swedish legation in Budapest in mid-July 1944. And a combination of bravado and bluff and leadership and mobilizing others, he in 6 months manages to save the remnant of 100,000 Jews. So what the whole bystander international community did not do, because they were a bystander community, one person, as I said, with the compassion to care and the courage to act, transformed history.
So let me ask you a question. What does it mean that we're growing up, based on the way Raoul Wallenberg lived his life, that we're growing up in this, what you call, an age of indifference and with a culture of impunity? You must feel like a lot of what you say falls on deaf ears.
Well, what makes the Holocaust and the genocides that followed, I'm thinking of, among others, the genocide of the Tutsis in Rwanda, what makes these genocides so unspeakable are not only the horrors of the genocides themselves, that would be bad enough. What makes them so unspeakable is that they were preventable. Nobody could say we did not know. We knew and we did not act.
I would like to quote you. We knew about Darfur, and it was preventable, and we did not act. We knew about Sudan, it was preventable, and we did not act. We knew about Syria, and we did not act. Can you explain to me what that frustration must feel like?
I don't get frustrated because I have a long-run view of history, and I'm an optimist by nature, and I believe, as Mandela said, that nothing is impossible until it happens.
By the time you were a young man, you decided you want to go and see the world. How does a young Jewish boy, like from Montreal, grow up and say, I want to go travel and see Egypt and Syria and Lebanon and learn the region? What caused you to want to do that? Well,
I've been interested in the Arab-Israeli peace process, if I use that term, as distinct only from conflict, from the time I was a student. And so I decided that the best way to learn about it and be engaged in it is to go and live and work in the Arab countries, to go to Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Palestinian territories, Israel.
As a young man, you were traveling through the Middle East as an academic, and you wound up in Egypt.
Yeah.
And somehow you wound up meeting the president of Egypt. And what happened?
Well, Egypt each year was my first port of call. And I spent a month at the Institute of Political and Strategic Studies at Al-Ahram. The head of the institute in those first 2 years that I was there was Boutros Ghali. And he had a fascination really about Israel, the Middle East and the like. In 1977, when I came back, he no longer was the head of the institute. He was now the Sadat's foreign affairs minister. So he said to me that he wanted me to meet with President Sadat, and I'll abbreviate the whole meeting very quickly. And Sadat basically asked me two questions. One was, can I make peace with the Likud government? I said, yes, and they can carry the rest of Israel. And he said, can I make peace with Menachem Begin, the new elected prime minister? I said, I don't know Prime Minister Begin, but he's known to me as being a principled leader, as a Democrat, as a parliamentarian. I believe he would want to make peace with the most important and significant Arab country, Egypt. He then gave me a note to deliver to Menachem Begin, to which I said to him, I said, I'm President Sadat, I mentioned to you, I don't know Prime Minister Begin. And he said, I believe you will be able to find a way to get this note to Prime Minister Begin. I'd rather not go through official channels. I'd rather give the note to somebody that the Israelis will trust and that I trust. And so what then happens is a matter of fortuity, but ends up a day later, I was sitting in his office. I shared the note with him, and the note was very interesting because it said...
Do you still have the note?
No, they have it somewhere in the archives here. But the note said that Sadat was prepared to enter into peace negotiations with Israel with a view to a peace treaty based on Israeli withdrawal from all of the Sinai and recognition of the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. Those were like the two. And I remember still seeing Begin, no, Bemet, like that. So he said to me, so let me ask you a question. Do you think I can make peace with President Sadat? I said, yes. And in particular, I said, because his wife wants it very much, and because his foreign affairs minister, Boutros Ghali, wants it very much. I said, you have nothing to lose.
How old were you at this time?
37.
So at 37, you initiated one of the most historic peace processes in the
No,
20th century.
there were a lot of other people involved, and and who brought it
But it began with you.
to fruition.
So you're traveling through the Middle East, and you already started to work on a case for a Soviet dissident named Anatoly Sharansky. Tell me about the Sharansky case and what it was for you, because there's 1,000 pages sent to every single head of state at the time. It was a career-defining case because of not only his popularity, but your success. How long did you work on the case?
I worked on the case pretty much non-stop from the time that I first heard about it. I started to collect evidence. The intense work was about 3 months for the brief itself.
And then how long from the time you finished the brief till he was freed?
That took till February 1986.
So it was about 9 years.
Non-stop advocacy.
So what was it like meeting with Gorbachev to discuss the Sharansky case after the fact? Because I assume it must have been surreal.
It was after the fact. We were on a panel, struggle for Soviet Jewry. He didn't speak English, but through a translator, I asked him, I said, look, you became president of the Soviet Union in 1985, and Sharansky was released at the beginning of 1986, some 8 months after you. I said, what role did you have in Sharansky's release? He said, I was a Secretary of Agriculture in the Soviet Union. I had never heard of Anatoly Sharansky. My first trip outside of the Soviet Union, he said, was to Canada as the Secretary of Agriculture in 1984. I met with the Parliamentary Committee on Agriculture, the Canadian Parliament. He said, yes, they asked me a few questions about agriculture. Then they started talking about this guy, Sharansky. I didn't know what they were talking about. He said, I then left the Parliament buildings. There was this huge demonstration placarding for this guy, Sharansky. Gorbachev says to me, I became president of the Soviet Union, so I ordered up his file. Who is this guy, So he said, I looked at the file, he said, yes, he was a troublemaker. He said, but he wasn't a criminal. He said, but it was, the key words, but it was costing us. It was costing us politically. It was costing us economically, because of sanctions, etc. And that became to me a model for human rights advocacy that, it's not enough to point out the injustice of the case. The tipping point becomes when the injustice is turned into a principle of self-interest, when they realize that keeping the political prisoner is costing them. And that's why he ordered his release.
All right. You free Sharansky. Okay, this is huge. Okay, communism falls. This is what, 89, 86 he was free.
Yes.
Okay, Soviet Union's done by 1990, 89. Mandela. I have to say something only to be funny.
Yeah.
As the Sacha Baron Cohen fan that I am.
So
You freed Nelson Mandela!
Free Nelson Mandela! Free Nelson Mandela!
The only thing I could think of when I started researching about you was how I had to say that in front of you because I'm such an Ali Sheep fan.
So am I.
Yeah, are you really?
By the way,
he's
you
hysterical.
do a terrific.
Oh, do I?
Yes.
Respect.
You sound exactly. Yeah.
Let's talk Mandela for a second because he's such an important character. And if I'm correct, when you met with one of the other ministers of the apartheid regime in South Africa, you had said that South Africa was the only post-Nazi government that had a policy of racism instilled in the country, and that you would fight it to the day that you died.
Well, what happened was that there were some very courageous students at the time, and Sharansky was in prison, okay? But the Sharansky case was well known in South Africa because South Africa was very anti-Soviet, you see, and they tried to portray Mandela as being an agent, and so, etc. Right. So they were law students, and with Witwatersrand, Wits University. They asked me if I could speak on the Sharansky case. So I said I'd be happy to speak on the Sharansky case, but I'd like really to speak on Mandela. I said, but I know Mandela's a banned person here.
You were arrested.
Yes, I got arrested, and a funny story because...
And that's what led to you meeting with
the minister, Pik Botha, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. It was very interesting because I walked into Pik Botha's office, and on the wall was a picture of Sharansky. And he said, you know who that is, right? I said, yes, that's Anatoly. He said, right. So I want you to know why I brought you here. So I could not understand how somebody like you, who represents a great hero, like Anatoly Sharansky, a great hero for us here in South Africa and the world, can take up the case of Nelson Mandela, who's our enemy, who's also a communist. So I said to him, I have to tell you, Mr. I said, both Sharansky and Mandela were fighting for the same thing, They're both fighting for freedom. They're both fighting for democracy. They're both fighting for equality. And I have to say that the Soviet Union is a major human rights violator, one of the major human rights violators in the world today. But South Africa is the only post-World War II country that has institutionalized racism as a matter of government policy. I said apartheid is not just a racist philosophy, it's a racist legal regime. And for so long as it takes, from wherever I am, I'm going to fight this racist legal regime until it is dismantled. But Pig Botha in the end changed sides.
So let me ask you a question that I think is a little pertinent to the place that we're sitting right now. You're a Zionist,
right?
And you also dedicated your life to fighting apartheid and human rights violators. But let me ask you a question: why is Israel not an apartheid state?
Well, first of all,
this is something that many people don't understand about this country.
If you say that Israel is like apartheid South Africa, that's absurd. To say that Israel is an apartheid state, what bothers me most about it, somebody who was involved in the struggle against apartheid, is that it demeans the real struggle against the real apartheid. It demeans the real heroism of those who fought against the real apartheid. It's to turn a false libel to a misreading of what in fact was the real and courageous and authentic anti-apartheid movement. Yes, Israel, like any other democracy, is imperfect. Yes, Israel, like any other democracy, has to be held accountable for any violations of human rights and humanitarian law. But if you say that Israel is an apartheid state, apartheid is defined in international law as a crime against humanity. Then if you say Israel is an apartheid state, you're saying that Israel is a crime against humanity. If it's a crime against humanity, then it has no right to be. Not only does it have no right to be, but there's an international responsibility for us to dismantle this racist apartheid Israel. That's why I say the whole thing is turning history on its head, turning human rights on its head, falsifying the real struggle against the real apartheid, and engaging in a group libel against Israel.
So let me ask you, what did Mandela think of Israel? Because you obviously became very close with him. You had to have spoken with him about Israel.
Yeah. Mandela, interestingly enough, saw the Israeli movement, if you will, even the Zionist movement as a kind of an authentic liberation movement. He speaks about Menachem Begin as being a kind of principled figure for him. What happened is Mandela then spends, this is before he was in prison. He's 27 years in a South African prison. The PLO, and I say this to their credit, visit Mandela regularly in that prison. Israel, regrettably, no Israeli representatives go see Mandela. So when he came out, he became a strong advocate for Palestinian rights. I have no problem with that. Makes sense. But he never disavowed his position, which he expressed to me, and it has been stated that Israel has a right to live in peace and security. Mandela got an honorary doctorate from Ben Gurion University. If this was such an apartheid state, he wouldn't have come to get an honorary doctorate. Mandela became a strong advocate for a two-state solution, of two states for two peoples, a strong advocate for Palestinian rights, and also critical of what he felt was Israel's treatment of the Palestinians.
Which you've been very vocal about.
So I've been vocal. But that's very different from him, accusing Israel of being an apartheid state that has no right to be.
You mentioned that most of the clients that you've had incredible wives and women behind them. What was working with these women like? I mean, Winnie Mandela and Natan Sharansky could change the world in a way more than their husbands. What can you tell me about them?
They were very courageous women. They thought only of the cause. They thought only of how, and when their husbands were in prison, that was their cause. That was it. And so I found a pattern. But the thing that I'm finding different today, as I'm saying, is that the women themselves are becoming political prisoners. And that's a new phenomenon.
We obviously need to talk about Iran and Nasrin Sotoudeh. This is the case that you're working on right now. Tell me who Nasrin is.
Nasrin Sotoudeh is a real iconic Iranian woman human rights lawyer. I would say she's the embodiment of the struggle for human rights in Iran as a whole. And her persecution and prosecution is a looking glass into the massive domestic repression.
Why are Western countries right now pursuing diplomatic legitimacy to the Ayatollahs when women like her are being forcibly veiled and imprisoned because they want to be able to live their lives like normal people?
You know, as I say, I don't think we have the kind of principle leadership, though I will say in the case of Nasrin Sotoudeh, the hypocrisy of the international community. Nasrin Sotoudeh was sentenced 2.5 years ago to 38 years in prison and 148 lashes, a virtual death sentence for a woman in her late 50s. But 2 days after that, Iran was elected to the UN Commission on Women's Rights with Western democracies, because it's a secret vote, we don't know who, with the support of Western democracies. Now that is, you know, a kind of damning comment on what is the principled leadership that is so lacking today.
I'm gonna do some rapid fire questions that I just want like one response from. Who's the greatest human rights violator in today's world?
Regrettably, Xi Jinping's China, because of its targeting of the 5 poisons, targeting the Uyghurs, targeting Hong Kong, targeting the Falun Gong, targeting Tibet, and targeting Taiwan.
How do you feel about Israel's policy towards Eritrean refugees?
I think it's been a terrible policy. I think that Israel, which was one of the first countries to have signed the Refugee Convention, to its credit, regrettably never set up a refugee determination process here in Israel. There's been no process by which they can even have their asylum request properly dealt with in a proper refugee determination process. I think, in a word, it's a failure.
I want you to look at me like I'm a 12-year-old getting ready for his bar mitzvah. If there's one thing that you could teach me, tell me one sentence that could sum up your life's experience, your life's work, everything that you would want a young person to know, but in one sentence, what would that be?
Pursue justice and combat injustice.
I want to thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Adam Bellos. We're here with the Honorable Irwin Cotler. We're drinking the 2018 Tulip Black. I just want to say thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. Every moment I get to spend with you is unbelievably awesome.
I have to say, unless you have a first-rate interviewer, you can't have an interview. And so, so I want to tell you, you're a terrific interviewer, and that's what makes it.
On that note, farewell and l'chaim. This is Wine with Adam, and I just want to thank my wonderful guest, the Honorable Irwin Cotler, for joining me today. I hope we get to do this more often, just off camera.
Couldn't have had a better glass of wine and drink l'chaim. I thoroughly enjoyed this.
L'chaim.
Kol tuv.
Today we were drinking the Tulip Black. You can find it online at wineonthevine.com. And if you want to plant a vine with the Tulip Winery, go to wineonthevine.org. And remember, when you're drinking your Israeli wine, drink it with someone you love.